Good evening.
Is that on?
I don't think there's any sound that comes through it.
Oh, is it
I
not?
think it's just picking up over there. Yeah. So welcome to UX Edinburgh.
Like to start, yeah, welcome. I'll hand you over to Gordon.
Yeah, welcome to UX Edinburgh. I'm Gordon. I'm UX principal here in this office and digital. So welcome to our office. Welcome to UX Edinburgh. We're really excited to be able to use the space here tonight. We've been wanting to do this for quite a while, to open up the space a bit to the community and to kind of just get everybody into it. I'm on the UX side, so I'm really excited that we've got lots of UX faces here today, which is really fantastic. Just a few kind of housekeeping things. There's loos over on that side, just immediately over there. There's an accessible toilet over on that side. If there was a fire, which hopefully unlikely, there's a fire exit there, back out the main door, or one right down at the end. So that's kind of housekeeping things. Obviously, if you've not had food and drinks, I think everybody's had food and drinks, please continue to help yourself and generally just enjoy the evening. There's a few people from and around here today, myself, my colleague Elena, there's Hans, Karen. If you want to have a chat about anything that the company does, then just feel free to come and have a bit of a chat. I will hand it to you.
Thank you, Gordon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this EdTech special edition of the UX meetup. We've got the... Hey, thank you. We've got the sun shining upon us again today, which is great. Whenever we have these events, we seem to have the sun shining, so God's obviously smiling upon us, and thank you for being here, as opposed to like all the other things that you could be doing out in the sun. So thanks very much. So yeah, the genesis of this meetup was a few months ago, I think now. Before Slack's memory, it's erased the trace of the conversation, but Matt, who's one of our speakers tonight, sort of floated the idea of having an EdTech UX mashup, and this was met with really sort of positive, uproarious response. And so, here we are. Just shortly after that, Gordon and kindly volunteered to host us. So, yeah, here we are today, and it's great to see so many of you. So yeah, just want to really thank people, the people that have been involved in kind of making this happen. So Gordon, Elena, Karen, the team at And. We've got Alan over there from Product Forge, who's kindly offered to live stream this again for us tonight, and of course our speakers tonight. We've got Matt, we've got Amy, and our workshop designer Zainab. In terms of the format of the night, we've got a couple of talks. So Matt will start off by giving us a bit of an overview of the EdTech sort of sector, and that'll be followed by Amy, who's going to talk a little bit about the relationship between learner experience and user experience. We'll take questions after that, and then we'll have a break of about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we've got a short workshop. Just reflecting on some of the themes that have been introduced during the talk, and then after that we'll be well, for those of you that want, we'll be off to the pub to continue the chat. So yeah, that's enough from me, I think. So I'm just going to hand straight over to our first speaker tonight, which is Matt.
Work the magic. Cool. Hopefully this will all work fine. Thanks, Mike. Thank you to Mike for basically having this community, but also to you for being in the community. And equally to Michael, who now I know where you are, because you wooed very loudly, for getting a few of us into a few Google Meets just to sort of chat through what's the point of this, what are we doing, and why is it valuable to everyone here. So credit to Michael for helping us bring relevance to you so that what I say is hopefully meaningful, resonates, gets you excited. My goal is that you leave here thinking, EdTech, I like it. So let's see how we get on. So I want to start off just by getting you to think about yourself, which is hopefully really easy. So can you think of a memorable learning experience that you've had in your past? That might be learning to drive. It might be learning how to cook something. It might be having a baby and being forced into parenthood and learning somewhat quite quickly, or maybe learning from other people's opinions about what you should be doing. A whole range of things in our lives, but I just want you just to think for a second, including those on the live stream, What was a learning experience that was memorable to you? Okay, enough awkward pause. Think about it. I did say make a note on your Post-its. Use your mental Post-it note to store that for later, because we're going to use it in a workshop. But I just want you to sort of just have that in mind about your own personal experiences as a learner as I go through this. And I'm also going to just adjust this so I have a clue as to what I'm talking about. So one of the issues with education generally is if you think back to structured education, people tend to teach how they themselves were taught. And the risk there, especially when the teachers don't have to go through any other form of training or qualification, is that old methods really perpetuate for quite some time. And a whole bunch of nonsense can exist for decades longer than it's meant to be. And I might give you a few examples. But also, it's a very human thing. We tend to do the things that work well for us unto others. Is that a good thing? No, not necessarily. Maybe. Like, it's certainly not an amazing thing necessarily. Like, there's quite a few caveats. And caveats might be one of my sort of takeaways from this talk. But here's a summary of what I will be sharing with you. That was just a sort of warm-up. I'll give you an intro to who I am and why have any credibility at all, that I think at least, to talk to you. I'm going to give you an overview of the EdTech industry, a bit of commercials, a bit of growth, a bit of the stuff around Edinburgh and why EdTech matters here. And then I want to talk about learning, experience, and impact. And hopefully those three will sort of coalesce into a few takeaways for you that Amy will then build upon in her talk. Because I'm basically just this sort of glossy front, not visually, just words. And then Amy will actually give you substance and detail and intelligent thoughts. So you can take that away after Amy's talk. So who am I? My name is Matt, which you probably heard for the 4th time. I grew up on a little farm in Devon with little baby lambs about this time of the year. It's very cute, small. And then I moved to London because I felt like if I wanted to get a job, you have to go to London. And 10 years mistakes later, I came to Edinburgh. And I made a fantastic decision to stay here. And I don't think I want to leave because Edinburgh is basically perfect. But maybe I'll find the edges at some point. I studied interactive multimedia because I didn't know what to do with my life. And I thought art and media was kind of cool. And that was a while ago, which is kind of embarrassing. So I grounded it with an education MSc because I needed something to sort of give my career a bit of a boost. And then I've worked in further education, higher education, fully online and distance education. And now I've sort of made a slight switch because I was getting a little bit too deep into education, into product development, because I like the idea that digital products are the way to meet just such a large audience in the world. I like running, I like cycling. I quite like to sort of sometimes just chill out on a paddleboard, but I'm learning to kayak. And it turns out people don't like to just kayak across a loch. They want to go down those insane rivers. So I'm a little bit nervous about the kayaking thing. And next time I talk, if it's deleted, just don't ask. It obviously didn't go very well. I like doing things around my house and hacking projects together. And equally, I try like doing some charity work as well. And my dog, Bracken, said that I've got to mention her. So I like ball, beach, ball. She doesn't really like running, but she tends to run around a lot and more ball. So that's for her. So sorry, you've got to do the thing for your loved ones. I'm trying to give you some context about being too stupid. But for other people, I've spent time in a college. I spent then quite a long time at UCL down in London, effectively being a learning technologist. And the point of explaining this is my role was to try and take the educators and try and take the new technologies and basically smush them together and make something meaningful. And that was quite an easy job in many regards. So then I tried to do it for UCL going fully online. And it was a very old organization trying to be very digital. And it moved like a steamboat or a tugboat or a rock. And it tried to move that way really quickly. And it was hard. So I quite enjoyed it because it was quite hard. And off the back of that, I joined FutureLearn. And FutureLearn was founded by the Open University. It was effectively a fully online, what was called a MOOC platform, with the remit of teaching millions of people for free, democratizing education, and then putting a massive paywall in front of everything and trying to commercialize it. So that's fine. It was great and a great experience. And I got to look after like millions of learners. I think I left on like 18 million learners, and I was like the learner experience guy. So that was quite a lot of fun. And then I'm now currently at PebblePad, which is a slightly niche EdTech product. I'm the director of product there, so I have a product team, and I've got a user experience team and a research team and product managers, and they're all wonderful. And because they're wonderful, they don't need me anymore, so I'm leaving to be going to become a co-founder for my business, which starts in June, and I'm definitely not completely terrified about doing that and going down to 0 income and battling my way out of that. So I do serious experiments at the same time, and I think you should all take away serious experiments as something that you might already do, or you should seriously consider. For me, they've been this weird little website that I'll show you later called Learning Circuits that was a graduate project from 2004, age check, that is now still going, sort of nearly 20 years later. Cogit was a thing I just wanted to help people check in with each other every day during COVID, because there was a lot of sort of disparate groups not knowing if their students were okay, so I built a little tool. Didn't work, that's fine, serious experiment. And free education was me trying to build a crowdfunding platform, super hard, totally failed, brilliant. But why should you do serious learning experiments? Or why should you do any serious experiment? Because it's beyond the portfolio. I think portfolios have a sort of time and a space, but I also think you and your character and the things you care about have more space than ever to flourish, thanks to things like no-code tools. So what I'm sort of trying to suggest here is that you can make something that you really care about. It can be entirely your idea, or a small group of you have a great idea, and you can build the whole thing and run with it. Talk to users, launch the thing, get a domain name, pay for it, put money in it, put time in it, and then evaluate the whole thing. And then watch it fail miserably, because it's so hard to do that kind of stuff in reality. And then learn, and then do it again, and then learn and do it again. Eventually, quit your job that pays okay and become a co-founder. That's my take anyway. So that's me. Why am I talking to you about EdTech? Well, my TED talk is education plus technology equals EdTech. Thanks for coming. In terms of education, the important things are like the sort of constructs, like what are the pillars of education? And hopefully this all just makes sense at this point. I'm not just talking nonsense. Like learning, teaching, and assessment is education. You can put everything else inside of it. Student welfare fits in that big bucket. You have to have learning, you have to have teaching, and you have to have assessment. I think if you take one away, you've got a bad building. It will fall down in the world of education. And then there's loads of people, and I've excluded lots of roles unintentionally. Students, educators, principals, managers, provosts, bosses, parents, dog owners. They're all teaching, learning, and assessing all the time. That's the role that they fulfill. And then after education, you have technology. So you've got to put education first. You've got to have teaching, learning, or assessment first. And then you slap in some great technology or technical solution. And that makes EdTech. So on the technology side, you've got products, platforms, services, the things that enable people to do things, the technology that enables you, the new shiny thing. And you've got technologists, designers, product managers, architects, business development, customer success, whatever. You've got the stuff that makes the technology work. And EdTech is just bringing those two worlds together, often with more people trying to make the two worlds actually make sense of each other. So if you want to have a career in this, or you have a career, maybe this might resonate. There's a whole bunch of sort of sub-areas within EdTech you can get involved in. So for design, you could literally design course content. You could also design the whole thing, like the course, the platform, the thing that the course lives on. Course is quite an open term, like some sort of structured learning experience. Or you could design digital products, digital services. You can whole thing, like you could build an EdTech product by just gluing a few things together and calling it something like personal tutoring is just done via Zoom and email. You don't have to build anything anymore, it's all there. In terms of research, there's loads of roles around research. Like, we still don't completely know how people learn. We've got a fairly strong idea about how people learn, but it's not finished. We can't just say, you learn this way, congratulations, follow that process and you'll be learning. It's like you have particular needs, you've got a different discipline or background, your skills are different, and we have to cater for that. And then there's gaps within the knowledge, so researchers need to plug those gaps and validate and invalidate bad and good theories, or rather good and bad theories. So there's a whole load of roles and people involved in the research space. Technologists just make stuff happen, and leadership makes sure that everyone is doing the right thing at the right time. So I won't elaborate too much, but effectively up to the top spectrum of running companies and leading teams and developing people, there's a whole range of roles in EdTech, and there's a lot of career opportunity in EdTech as well. This map is probably a bit too difficult to read, but I'm just trying to signal that one group out there called Holon IQ tried to sort of make sense of EdTech by doing a sort of what is the landscape, what's going on in the EdTech landscape. And they've just mapped all the companies that they've found across the world. They've found about 1,700, but these are the established companies in EdTech across the world. And then they map them towards a sort of domain area so that you can get a sense of what it looks like if you were to explore EdTech. And this is just 100 from actually a couple of years ago that are just in America. Many of these are unicorns. Many of these have raised hundreds of millions of funding in the US. Some of them might even be logos that you might recognize. You might know Skillshare, which I'll talk about, edX, Civitas. I actually don't know. I think Amy talked about them, not in her talk, but I think they're in the UK somewhere, or they have a presence. Some of these are probably already gone, like it's quite ephemeral. Some of these are probably already over or merged or been acquired. But there's just a lot out there, and it's a growing industry. And there's also some in Edinburgh. So I don't know if any of you, any woos for any logos here? Is that a woo, or is it a recognition? Woo! Some dog come up in the news quite a bit. There was some funding a few years ago. Robotical make Marty, like a little robot. They were based in Marchmont. I think they've moved office. Administrate are sort of their code-based area. They're pretty cool. They do 6-day week, 4-day week, 6-day weeks. Screw that. And then Gecko do AI in student recruitment. And this is all just in our city. So I'm not just like talking about America and what have you. This is local stuff that's also growing in Edinburgh. And the market itself has taken a post-COVID hit, haven't we all? But the general trend is very, very positive towards the funding that's going into EdTech. So unless if you like working for free, like a co-founder, you're going to eventually want to work for companies that have money. And there is money sort of pouring into EdTech, which is generally a positive thing. And I don't know how you measure your market, but in EdTech, it's 6.5 trillion. And that sounds like loads of money. So I thought I'd make it big and pink to try and highlight that there is money inflowing into this area. But what's most relevant is around this time last year, maybe late in 2021, Chinese government said, we're just going to smash loads of EdTech companies down, take all their money away, take all their power away, and a huge amount of personal tutoring just dropped out of the Chinese market. And so that reverberated across the whole world of EdTech, and it was pretty big news, pretty bad news, apart from in Europe, where Europe was like, there's loads of different things going on here that did not impact Europe at all, and European EdTech continued to sail upwards. If anything, it was slightly elevated because of that news. I'm not saying it's good news. I'm saying it showed resilience in a time of economic uncertainty. That's the good bit. Don't take the rest of it as good news. So to summarize the industry bit, why is it good? In terms of growth, there's more of this than ever before, and there's a lot of crossover between user and learner experience, and that's a positive thing. And there's lots of evidence, lots of science, lots of data, and lots of things to still unpack. This is not a done industry. There's loads to do, and people will learn as a benefit, so that's cool. It's very, very friendly. I've never met people in EdTech who don't want to share their secret sauce, who don't want to share what they do, who don't even want to just tell you what they do without even asking. People want to give you things, and the communities are all open, mostly free, or very, very low cost. There's no big game in this. It's all very sharing. And then the last thing is about impact, and I'll pick up impact later. The impact here is sort of unlimited, but also very, very visible. You can really feel the impact of working in EdTech or in education generally. So, learning. For those that don't know, learning starts somewhere and doesn't even really finish somewhere else. And it is all about the journey. It's about that path, which is kind of not even straight or simple to understand. Like if you're learning something, if you're learning to drive, or you're learning to be a parent, or you're learning to get your job, or promotion in your job, you don't just go and learn something and you're done. You continue to learn and refine and improve and think what next and what could be built upon this. And you go in a really sort of funny pattern. And actually the funny pattern is the stuff where all the cool things happen anyway. All that informal ad hoc learning you've done in your life might be more significant eventually than the sort of big degree that you spent sort of thousands of pounds on in several years and you quite enjoyed it, but actually it was your career that really taught you everything, or your friends, or your life, or what have you. And that's all the stuff I'm trying to simplify here in that really rubbish diagram. And how people learn, and Google Slides is not great for animation, is really, really complicated. These are just some examples of the sort of processes or the systems in place, the methods that you could follow if you wanted to, in a sort of pick-and-mix style of how you could be a teacher or how you could be a sort of self-directed learner. And if I just picked on one, which is like peer editing, for example, I could have you all now in a Wikipedia article saying, let's do an editathon right now and add new things into Wikipedia. And you'll be searching and researching and finding and compounding ideas, putting them into Wikipedia, seeing if you get rejected. You'll be learning something, but that might not be the right style for this room. And to be honest, it'll probably take your eyes off me, which will make me a bit sad. So we won't do that right now. But all I'm saying is once you start digging into it, there's a lot that you could do as an effective teacher. To the point where, to my reference earlier to point at you and make you a bit uncomfortable, there is no one-size-fits-all anyway as a teacher. You can't take the same group and just say, well, if it worked for them, it'll work for them, because they could be adults as professionals and they could be children running around and they're not going to follow the same pattern. And I'm just saying that because you can't just take a golden formula and apply it everywhere. So what you have to do in this space is sort of what I say, wiggle around. Like you've got to understand the truths and the myths. And there's many outdated theories that persist, and they're crap, and they just won't go away. And they can sneak in. Like you don't even know when they might sneak in. They could have snuck in tonight. Like you might have just been told one. And I don't yet know, because I can't do the latest research on all of those approaches. But there's also some good methods that still stand strong. A challenge is the perception of learning is if I get a stack of content and sit there and work hard, that will work. And the other challenge is the new shiny stuff like ChatGPT is going to solve all of our problems anyway, so don't worry about the stack of content. And in a way, you're both right and you're both wrong. And so it is a bit of a horrible sort of dichotomy. And an example of that is the sort of perception of digital learning versus traditional learning. Like digital learning is better because it's available to everyone, it's on a smartphone, and it's free, and it's great, and it democratizes. And then obviously the inversion of that is no one's interacting, everyone's lonely, and we're all just sort of basically eating pizza and not really paying attention. And advantageously, where the research kicks in, is actually you can say there is no significant difference. If you're learning on a laptop or if you're learning in a classroom, if you're asleep, you're asleep. It doesn't matter. So the teacher, the system, the EdTech, has to actually follow the method of effective teaching, learning, and assessment to make it work for you through that medium. So the short answer is the approach, the thing that you're on in a room or in a laptop doesn't matter. It's the person and the system and the approach that they're using to engage you, to get you to learn things. That's the only thing that matters. And I've got loads of meta studies, 220 of them, to back me up. So fight for it. Here's a slide I nearly took out, which is just to say that there are some really, really, really simple methods that have just survived for decades. And this is about spaced repetition, which is if you get something once, it'll fade out of your memory, and it's gone, and it's not really learned. It's like when you've just listened to someone talk for, what will it be, 30 minutes, and you take away 2 things. If I repeat myself a few times, I'm spacing them across the session, and you might take away a bit more, and your sort of forgetting curve goes up, and you take away more. But you've got to build that in over time. And this is a fairly solid method that maybe in 20 years will be completely debunked. For now, it's standing strong for now. Same goes for content. There's a big sort of assumption that if I build great text, video, articles, that kind of stuff, people can just go to it and learn. I think content was king until we realized that we could just auto-generate content on an absolute whim as much as we want. And then the content is meaningless because there's no interaction, there's no engagement, and there's no drive to succeed. There's no teacher giving it a direction. So the learner doesn't know what they're meant to be doing, and everyone gets a bit confused. So just watching YouTube isn't really learning anything. You've got to structure yourself around something. You've got to do something extra. And that's where teaching starts to kick in. You're not just sort of passively taking the content. And we live in a world of content abundance. We're going to live increasingly in a world of content abundance where the value of content will go down, but people still need to learn things. So that's where experience kicks in. So thinking about you all as professionals in UX in one way or another, hopefully these principles will probably be on your yes list. Like, yes, we've got to be user-centered. We've got to think about usability, accessibility. Feedback could be systematic or human to human. And it should be informed by data, evidence, analytics, insights. All of this, hopefully, is on your yes list as well. If not, cool, I would like to know why not. But hopefully, fairly solid principles. On the maybe list is stuff that's sort of more debatable. So I'm just going to do a time check. OK. So if you're in a checkout, you want to have user control around shoe size, shoe color, brand, price, that kind of stuff. Same goes for learning. If you're on an online environment, you want to choose the right course. Is it fit for me? Number of hours, reputation of the provider. That's where control is great. But inside the learning, like, do I want to learn this bit or this bit, control becomes less obvious. You don't necessarily want to give like the locus of control to the absolute nth degree for a learner. They might need to follow a pattern or a path because people don't know what they don't know. So you've got to direct them towards something to sort of nudge them into new knowledge or new experiences. And that's the role of the educator, the role of the EdTech. Same with flexibility. Airbnb is fantastic for flexibility. Where do you want to go? How much money have you got? How many people are coming? World-class experience. Well, you don't really get world-class experience in EdTech, which is kind of awkward because it's different, it's less money. But in Khan Academy, it's an example of how there is some flexibility. What level of study? What's your experience? What direction do you want to head in? And then the flexibility sort of falls away because it gives you quite a structured learning experience. And underneath it, there might be some tailoring, but that's where the flexibility drops off. So that's why you can't keep pushing flexibility. You have to sort of make a judgment call on when it's appropriate and when it actually is inappropriate to give learners too much flexibility. Same for consistency. You do want consistency in checkouts. It makes people buy things and open their wallet. Same goes for the presentation of some content. So for a learner, you don't want to make watching a video a sort of cognitively difficult task. If the video's got some great content, I know it sounds obvious, you want a really obvious play button. But everybody's building their own platforms, and sometimes in like EdTech, people have a lot of visual control over how things look and feel. And the risk is that you sort of need to make a decision on consistency. So UI, you want consistency, which is sort of like what I'm getting at. But underneath it, what you don't want to do is have so much consistency, you're just sort of clicking rote buttons and buttons, so it's like next, 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 it's so consistent. You want to build a bit of inconsistency and a bit of sort of thoughtfulness, a bit of friction that Amy will cover properly later. So that's my get out clause. A few more examples. For preference, consumers, I know I've sort of stuck on e-commerce for the left side, so apologies. For consumers, preference is great because it lets me feel like I own something. And in education, you probably want to own your goal. You want to own the topic you're studying, the level you're studying at. But actually, after that, you probably still need to fall back onto some kind of path. Even if that pathway gets to know you and can adapt towards what it knows about you, you're still on some kind of like guided or directional pathway. So if you add too much preference, the learner may not know if they're making a good judgment call when they're exercising their right to have preference. I wasn't sure if this message was going to be delivered very well by me. But what I'm getting at is like too much preference can be a risk if you're building that into the UI for learners. And the last example is style. If you're buying a brand new car, you want to be wowed by the visuals of the car, because that's the best the pixels can give you at the time. For Skillshare, for example, style is still a preview of the course, like colorful logos, things to draw you in. But it's still basically, you're going to watch some content, you're going to play through some ideas, you're going to build a project. The sort of style just sort of drops off. And the reason for that is that learning doesn't have to be stylistic. It doesn't have to be just fancy for the sake of fancy. It needs to be practical and pragmatic and get on with things. And that's the message I'm trying to land. So I'll wrap up on impact. This is a quote from Richard Feynman, the physicist, which is, the more you teach, the better you learn. And teaching is a powerful tool to learning. And I think I was alluding to it earlier, sort of somewhat by mistake, which is if you're an excellent learner and you know your domain, you can teach it. The risk is that teachers don't know their domain, but that's a separate point. But like, you can reach true excellence and mastery of learning when you're able to teach it to other people. How do I do that? This is my embarrassing student project website. Yay, putting your own work in front of people. It is hideous. I completely agree with you. I rebuilt this monster in COVID because Flash was dead, and I had to suddenly do something. So I built it in Bubble, no code, and yeah, it's pretty horrible. But I'm happy about it because kids tell me, actually, no, wait, teachers tell me, and this is the old version in Flash. It was pulled up for a TV program quite a few years ago, and this teacher, Julia, was like, actually, this is better than the others because it's free, and she was just sort of mic dropped and said, yeah, the others are hundreds of pounds, and this one's not. It's just as good, and everyone went, okay. So nothing like being defended. But the best defense is your users, and my users are aged between 8 and 13. So what could you say wrong about that? So Vera thinks my website is really helpful, and it taught them a lot. Anon, because I don't always get the name, is it's kind of boring when you've got to do learning. I'm with you, Anon. Anon 13 says it's a bit zesty, which is so great, because I don't even know how to make it more zesty for the rest of us. Anon 11 says, I like that it's easy, I don't like it's kind of broken, and I agree, because if you told me where it was broken, Anon, that would have been really helpful. And lastly, Anon, who's 43, definitely, said it's too much learning, disappointed I couldn't get a pizza delivered from your site, and I make zero reference to pizza on my site. So maybe they foresaw the talk, I don't know. I guess my only point is I love, for me, to see on my sort of what I call my little pet project, my little sort of pet university thing I've kept alive through hosting it, is a class, like that was definitely a class of students using it with the teacher, probably on a whiteboard, saying, what do you think will happen if I change the batteries or the cells for this circuit? It still makes me happy. I mean, 3 million learners I passed a couple of years ago, and it just made me think, like, that's loads of people. I'm super stoked about that. Because I'll end on Our World in Data, showing between 1980 and 2020, I think it ends, generally the world is getting a higher level of sort of tertiary, so higher education. Generally, the trend is it's getting better. But there's still a lot of people that are 15 years or older with no education. And now that is the share of the population with no education sort of dropping. But like those countries are still amber. Like there's still a global education problem. And technology is one of the only ways that we're going to achieve it at scale and at the cost it needs to be. So in summary, 8 billion people need you. So that's the end of my talk. Over to Oh, no. Why did I hit share? I don't want to share. Hit the wrong button.
No. Just the next, yeah? Okay, perfect. Hi, I'm Amy. I'm an online learning consultant, and I'm going to chat to you for a couple of minutes to then get you prepped to be making your own EdTech ideas. I work in predominantly online content, but I do face-to-face stuff as well, and then all the blending, the hybrid, and all that stuff in between. But it's not about me. It's about you and learn design and where are the commonalities. So friends or foes, we'll come back to this a few times. Let's do that show of hands. So raise your hand if you have ever looked something up, researched it, tried to look into information. I'm expecting a lot of hands. Come on, guys, come on. Lovely. Now, keep those hands up if you did something with the information that you then learned. Because that is learning. Yay! Aren't we all good? Learning is the ongoing tussle between retrieval and application. So just looking something up doesn't necessarily mean that you've learned something. Doing something with that information, that's the learning. That's when the learning happens. So I want to give you a little quote from Donald Clark. He's a EdTech entrepreneur. Teaching largely addresses deficits in motivation and effort. Learning is largely achieved by the learner. Learning, therefore, has little to do with single experiences. It is a complex, ongoing, long tail of activity, a process. Learning is a process. Essentially, will never stop. It just keeps on going. You can always keep learning. But what that also says, which it alludes to at the beginning, is that it's not something you can really do completely on your own. So often there's a need, little motivational nudges, wherever they come from. We'll come back to that a little bit later on. So what the learner wants versus what is good for learning. And these two aren't necessarily very often the same things. I'm not really sure. Yeah. So there's a lot of things in the learning space that, sorry, it's really strange. This is like the first in-person thing that I've done, and I've got screens on either side, and I'm looking between and around. So if you think that I'm doing some kind of strange dance, apologies. It's my environment. So yes, what the learner wants isn't necessarily always what is good for learning. Let's look first at what learning is. Learning is hard. Humans naturally want things to be easy, but learning is often hard work. It doesn't necessarily, the easier it is, often the less you learn. You need motivation, you need to feel motivated. It's something intrinsic, you need to want to be doing it, and sometimes it's like extrinsic motivation that you need. You need, that little badge, or you need a degree qualification waiting for you on the other side, or you need a tutor or a friend or someone say, go on, you can do it, you can get to the end. You need some motivation, otherwise it's not a long term, and it has to be longitudinal. Learning keeps on going, it keeps adding. You need the retrieval, you need the practice, you need the application. But even though it's hard, it doesn't mean that it can't be enjoyable. And we'll come on to this a little bit later on, hopefully. Learning is also long, as I mentioned before. Quick engagement doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to learn anything. Instant gratification, we get into this habit quite a lot. You go online, you scroll, look something up, but having instant access doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to remember what you've looked at in 20 minutes time, in an hour's time, in 4 weeks time. The reality is that the harder it is, and the more times you look at it, and the longer that process of learning is, the more likely it's going to stay with you. And that's also just because of how we learn. As human beings, we put something in our heads, and there's like a little schema. It just sits there for a moment, and unless you keep attending to it, it fades. Memory and memory traces, they need to be actively retrieved. Otherwise, learning doesn't actually, it's just a thing that you once looked at and then you move on. Learning is also messy. How many times have you looked something up and had 15 tabs before you knew it? You've just got like loads of stuff going, you've got something on your phone, and you're looking something else over here, you've got a book open, you're scribbling some notes. It's it's not a linear process. It's not something like, today I'm going to learn about this particular thing, and everything, everything's in a very linear order. It doesn't work like that. That's not living, that's not life, that's not how humans work. Humans engage in messy processes, no matter how much we hope they don't. As a learning designer, and we'll come to that in a second, learners also make their own paths. Matt mentioned this just a minute ago, that there may be similar experiences are provided, but people make their own paths through it. Their lives are messy in that space. They want different things. They're attending more to particular things than others. They're jumping out on different things that make them excited to learn more. And that all requires also breaks. That messiness isn't the same flow for everybody. Some people will need to just walk away for 20 minutes, or they'll need some novelty, and they need some other bits and bobs going on in order to succeed in that learning process. And just to add to the messiness, technology in its very nature is also messy. It messies things even further. So this is a quote from Tim Fawns, and it gets a little bit academic towards the end, but bear with me. It's a good quote. Since technology is entangled within pedagogy, it's not possible to first choose a pedagogy and then a technology, nor can pedagogy be tacked onto an existing instantation of technology. What that essentially means is that inbuilt within your tech, there's design processes going on. There's stuff, there are ways that they're wanting you to engage with that technology. And likewise, the pedagogy, the things that you're wanting them to do in that learning process as a learning designer, that also has implicit, it's messying things even further. You're trying to engage with a tech, let's say, even just look at note-taking. How many different note-taking tools are there, and how many of them force you into different ways, like opening up folders in different things, or might be really good for adding notes or annotating particular types of things, but not necessarily if you're sitting on the train and you just want to make a quick note like that. They're all implicit. They've got these different legacies. So just to recap, learning is a process. It's hard, it's long, it's difficult, it's messy. It's a difficult space. But design is where you can help people make sense of this. That's where that's where we come in. The reality is that whilst there's all of these different needs of the learner that we've already highlighted, learning is difficult, learning is messy, learning takes time. That doesn't necessarily set you up in a way that you go, oh, I can't wait to learn now, that sounds difficult, but it doesn't need to be, and it can be fun, and it can be engaging. So we're now like, how do you encourage a learner to do something? And this is where it starts to get really interesting. So learning and learning design is essentially that process of trying to help people do the things that are good for them, but they don't necessarily want to do intuitively themselves. So let's go back to Matt's point around what he mentioned as the forgetting curve. You might all remember that. The forgetting curve, and a process that you can do to help with the forgetting curve, is spaced retrieval. So the whole point in that is let people forget things, not too much, but let them forget a little bit, and then retrieve it, bring it back. And the more you do that, the more you allow people time to forget, and then pull it back and encourage them to reflect and kind of bring it back to their memory, it will entrench more in your mind. And that is a counterintuitive thing. As a learner, you're like, well, I should never forget something. Well, actually, learning, the learning process would beg to differ. The human mind works in miraculous ways. And the point of a learn designer is to help with some of those processes. So in the EdTech space, learning and designing for learning is really important to think about how people best learn, and that not necessarily be what's easy. It's not necessarily what's obvious. It's not necessarily what is intuitive. So learning design is pedagogy. Pedagogy is essentially like the dance. It's the dance that you're doing to help people engage with a learning process. It's the stuff, it's the pot, this is the thing we're going to do, and this is how we're going to engage in that process, and how we want you to engage with it and with me as the tutor, for example. So essentially, you're pouring in a load of knowledge into this bucket, this space of how people best learn and how that topic is best communicated. So you're thinking about topic flows, you're thinking about kind of like layering, storytelling, you're thinking about, oh gosh, this is where putting my own knowledge to the test, my own space retrieval practice, guys. This is what you're seeing. Yeah, you're essentially putting in and creating an environment based on knowledge of how people learn that is in itself conducive to learning. I've got a little faux quote from a potential learner. This feels like a nice space to learn. The people who put this together obviously care about my learning experience. Maybe I will too. And this is part of that thing we alluded to at the very beginning of learning is actually a really difficult process to do fully on your own. And that's why, kind of like when you engage with EdTech, or if you engage with courses, for example, even if the tutor isn't there, you know, it's nice to feel that someone was once there. Someone put their heart, their soul, their passion into that space to make it exciting and to make you, as learners and engagers of that process, want to engage with this learning experience that's been offered. Learning design is also architecture. So what we mentioned before, you know, you found something, you do something with it, and you want, and those two processes, that kind of loop between finding something and doing something and activities to encourage that to happen, that's part of a learning design process. You know, that's something you can encourage within the digital interfaces or in a face-to-face tutoring session, for example. But often it's within that bucket, it's because people want to get something out of it, or they want to go somewhere, they want to get something like a badge, or they want to get something like recognition, or just to be able to do something different within their workplace. So part of that architecture is the structured activities. So kind of color-coded it a little bit. So you've got the yellow blocks are the stuff you wanted to look up, and then the blue is like the stuff that you can do with it. So these bigger blocks might be kind of assessments or essays, or they could be collaborative group projects, you know, bigger, meatier things, or it could just be kind of a couple of short quiz questions just to double check that you've retained that information. These structured activities aid in the learning process. So the architecture, and many of these words will probably start to feel quite familiar if you're in a UX space, but you know, we're talking about design architecture here. But design architecture that encourages rehearsal, that encourages retrieval, evaluation, so whether or not something was useful, whether or not you want to use it again, re-articulating things, so just not just looking at something and going, oh, that's interesting, I've read that, and move on, but actually this is where the learning designer kind of comes in to do things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do yourself, because reflection is so good for you, yet it is, the motivation to try and do it off your own back is really hard. If anyone has a blog and they do it, well, like, I think I've started about 12 over the years, and it gets like 4 blogs, and then I'm out. I can't do it anymore. Because the reality is that you're trying to architect, you're trying to create a space where you're encouraging people to not just learn stuff and not just kind of think about that stuff and bring it together, but you're also wanting them to do something, because you're wanting them to make more touch points. You're wanting them to engage with that kind of learning material more, so that over time, hopefully, that body of knowledge will start to grow and will start to blossom for that person, and then they can apply it in other contexts. So this is, again, a little faux quote at the bottom. Please do everything. If you don't, you're only letting yourself down. We just care about your learning. That's from the voice of a learning designer. Learning design is also responsible technology choices. It is so tempting. There's so many. Matt already had a whole slide, hundreds, if not, there'll be thousands of different tools, not just in the EdTech space, just in the the general technology space that you could use. So many things, and it's so tempting to just throw all those things in at once and be like, why don't you just engage with all of this? But the reality is that that's not particularly good for learning. And it's not good for learning for a number of different reasons. Firstly, technology themselves, they're not neutral. You know, they've been designed in a very particular way for a very particular experience. And those experiences have affordances and they have limitations. And that's something that, you know, the more of those kind of issues, the more messy you make the space, the harder the learning actually is. We've just seen that learning itself is messy, so why make it messier? Learn designers should help navigate this environment, not make it worse. And you're not wanting people to learn about the tech. You know, the tech should be kind of invisible. It should be the thing that helps the learning. It shouldn't necessarily be the thing that you're like, oh, yet another tool that you've got to download, or you've got to kind of install, or you've got to configure, or you've got to try and understand where the hell you are. You know, that's not the point of the learning experience. The tech should be supportive. It shouldn't be the focus. And this responsibility that comes with tech is also about selecting the minimum number that you need in order to make that learning experience happen. So it's not just about kind of just throwing more in. More actually typically creates less learning. You know, the reality is that if you can do some of that heavy lifting for the learner as a learn designer, and think about, well, what is the experience we're actually trying to get at the end? What are these learning outcomes that we're aiming for? And selecting your tech accordingly, you're probably going to end up with happier learners that aren't necessarily having to think about all the other nuances on the outside. So far we've learned that learn design is pedagogy, architecture, and tech to help learners learn and get over essentially the hard, long, messy, entangled tech learning experience. So essentially what we're doing is we're using learning design to help make better learning experiences that last for longer and ideally are a little personalized for or give opportunity for learners in that experience to personalize themselves. So just as a kind of a snapshot overview, the skill of learn design is to identify the highest value experiences and resources communicated in the best possible order within the parameters of the identified goals and objectives. It should distill passion for a subject to inspire further lifelong learning. Many of these things will sound quite similar as well to many of the worlds that you operate in. But it's just to kind of highlight that, you know, it's not just about throwing everything in. If you're passionate about a subject, you should be able to kind of highlight to people the best bits. You should be like, these are the things that you need to look at. These are the things that get you hopefully you get as inspired about this topic as I am inspired about it. Whilst, you know, if you want to just learn everything, you could throw it in, but that's not necessarily going to get people with those longer lasting memories. So user experience, users, learners, are they the same thing? Versus learning experience design. The reality is that learners are always users. They're always users of a learning experience, but users aren't always learners. You know, I guess this is a thing that we could maybe debate for probably a whole extra couple of hours. But the idea is if someone's going to a website, they're not necessarily trying to learn directly stuff, and they're not looking for a learning experience sometimes. The learning experiences are different to engaging with a set of materials to help you get something like a springboard to other things. Learning is experience, and experience is learning. Yeah. Designing experience is a dance. And we've kind of mentioned this a few times, you know, it's that whole, you're moving between a number of trade-offs. You're trying to find the right fit, you know, as a learn designer, you're trying to encourage the dance. The pedagogy is the dance. You know, how do you want people to engage with this experience? What is this experience that you want to leave them with? And then within this constant reflection, this constant balance, we're talking about trade-offs. You know, how do we make this better, longer, personalized learning thing happen? Every design decision is made for learning is user experience. We're still talking about experiences here, but with the purpose of longevity of learning. You need to make concepts stick. The stickier the better, and that's, again, it's a term that's often used for kind of ensuring that something lasts with people. And choose some simple solutions. So make something that is fit for purpose. So thinking about some of those trade-offs, there's many, many different ways of kind of comparing and contrasting, but here's just a kind of a number of things to kind of get us started, and hopefully some of the conversations will make a bit more sense when we go on to the breakout groups. But some examples of experience trade-offs that we're talking about. You've got frictionless versus frictionful, fun versus functional, novelty versus consistency, linearity versus engagement, or entanglement even, and independent versus social. They're not strictly like only in that way. You can kind of compare and contrast them in many different ways, but let's just kind of bear with me. Let's just go on a little journey together on this particular set of trade-offs and think of some of the kind of the interesting design decisions that you might make within them. So I've gone for the most horrendous pictures that I possibly could. Frictionless versus frictionful. So when we think about experiences, especially online, we go first to kind of, we want them to be easy. We want them to be frictionless. We want you to have an ease of transition between different pages, between like sites, clicks between, everything should be intuitive, and you should just move your way through without any hesitation, no abruptness, no stops. The reality is, actually, sometimes you learn with a little bit of friction. Sometimes you want it to be chunky. You don't want it to always be smooth. You might be watching a video and suddenly, poof, up comes a little pop-up that kind of says, what did you actually learn? What did you see? Or like ask a question about something. That can be quite useful for some of these retrieval practices. You don't want it always to be completely frictionful. If everything is always a challenge, if every time you go into an experience, you're just constantly having to kind of wade your way through pop-ups, you're probably not going to get much out of that experience at all. But it's a balance. Fun versus functional. You might be, well, I'm sure you're all familiar with Duolingo, for example. Duolingo is an amazing EdTech platform. It's really sticky, it's super fun. You go in and you've got all these cute little kind of cartoons pop up, and if you don't kind of go in for a particular time, it tells you you're letting Duo down, and then you feel really bad, and then you go back in, and then you learn for a little bit longer. That's great, it's super fun. But that kind of practice isn't necessarily what you want for everything. If you're sitting there and you're writing a report, and you want to kind of learn about a particular subject, you're probably going to go to Wikipedia. You're not going to wait until you've unlocked your badge in 4 weeks' time and you've got that particular additional jewel set has come through just so that you could have finished off that report. You're going to look for something that's fit for purpose. Fun can be fun. Playful learning's really good. Playful learning is an amazing way of encouraging people to engage with topics, but it's not right for everything, and it's not right all the time. So sometimes you want it fun, sometimes you want it functional. I'm going to keep it, I see a few yawns. Right, guys, just bear with me. Can everyone just like jump up or move, or you're going to have to do something? Woo, come on, just like, come on, wiggle, wiggle. Yeah, great, lovely. Right, novelty versus consistency. So, it is, as a learner, especially as an adult learner, sometimes you just want to know where you stand. You want to go in, you want to know what you need to do, you want to know what's expected of you, you want to know in advance that, okay, every single week I need to put aside 5 hours of learning. It's probably best for me to do it on a Sunday, and I'm going to just blitz through it. Or maybe I need to do an hour each day. Maybe that's the, and you need to know that there is consistency within that process in order to help you, I don't know, like plan out your week. However, the problem with consistency is sometimes it can get dull. Sometimes it can be a bit boring. Sometimes you just want to jazz things up a little bit. Novelty is important for learning. It's important to keep people on their toes. It's important to kind of keep things fun and interesting. But you don't want everything to be constantly fun and constantly kind of like just expecting more effort from you. That gets tiring, and that in itself isn't particularly good for learning. You still want people to be excited. You still want people to be engaged. You need a little bit of novelty, but just like a little bit of salt. You just need a little bit. You don't need loads. Linearity versus entanglement. I've used entanglement a few times, but essentially keeping things in a particular order, much like consistency, it's nice to kind of think about the plan, the flow. Learning is a process. You've made this amazing flow with this excellent set of topics, and you want people to move through. You've kind of justified it as a learn designer. You're really excited. You give it to the learners, and then they do their own thing. They jump forward. They look at something 4 weeks in advance, and then they go back, and then they have to understand all the concepts again, and you're like, well, actually, that's how people learn. You know, you provide them with a process. You hope that they're going to engage with it in a particular way, but the reality is they're going to make their own path through it. And that's okay. That's cool. That's something to embrace. It's something to be aware of, though. You know, if you absolutely have to have a particular progression of topics, you could potentially restrict it. You could have it that there are conditional options. People can only see one thing if they've passed Go via a particular route. It's not very common, but it can happen. If you need fundamental concepts, for example, then to understand a higher level topic. But you really should kind of like be engaging with the learning experience, expecting people to kind of mess it around a little bit, hack it a little bit, find their own journey, find their own way through things. And then independent versus social. We see this a lot, especially with online learning, that you know, adult learners, our lives are they're already set. You know, if we do learning, it's around all of our other commitments. Learning isn't the thing, you know, when you're at university, for example, learning is the thing that you're doing first, and then other bits of life go around. Well, you know, that's not the reality for most people in the learning space. So independent learning is something that's often very actively encouraged. So you provide these spaces for people to engage with things independently without others, without perhaps requiring in-person attendance at a particular time or synchronous sessions online. But the reality is, as humans, we're not particularly good at doing things completely on our own. If we're left to our own devices, we probably won't do it. We need skin in the game. We need to feel that we're not letting someone down. Poor little Duo and his little sad face, his little cry eyes. You know, the independent learner still needs that sense that they're doing something meaningful, like people see them, that they are seen, and that they are achieving as they move and progress through. So that's where the social element. Social isn't always just about kind of like meeting friends and connecting with peers. You know, the social can also be the idea of that sense of a tutor at scale. So the narrative text having a nice chatty feel, as if you know, an actual person or a human-like chatbot has created it is nice. It's nice to feel that someone is there and they're nudging you, but also social learning is something that is really, you see this with leaderboards all the time. You know, people are motivated by badges and leaderboards. So friends or foes, probably reliant on and complementary of one another. Learn design has a lot of similarities to user experience. User experience is actually kind of part and parcel of the learn design process. The only kind of nuance is the fact that, you know, when we're creating things for learning, we need it to be mindful of how people learn and encourage them to get through and to learn to the end. And here's my little transition slide of my happy little learn designers and user experience people hand in hand with all of these different wonderful trade-offs. So yeah, so that's me. And that's kind of, this is what we're going to be chatting through a little bit for your EdTech workshop session next. So not just these, but a series of other kind of trade-offs, because the reality is when you're creating things in this space, they're also messy. You know, we're going through a messy design process as we're working through many of these things. You know, Matt mentioned before, you know, that massive list of different learning type, you know, different experiences that you can do, different pedagogies, different approaches. And all of these are kind of things that you're thinking through of how to get the most, you know, the best balance. Think back to that little seesaw that we had just a minute ago as well. So this is, I had thought that it was going to go straight into the workshop, but now we've got our Q&A. Maybe Matt, do you want to join? Is there anything else you want to add in to what I said about stuff? No? I don't know how the QA bit's going, so I'm just like, I'm freestyling now.
Before we move to Q&A, can we get a big hand for Stuart? Yeah, you can move the questions down. Yeah, you want to just no, you can. Ricky's got the mic for questions if anyone wants to go first.
Excellent. Who's next?
I've got a question. With your learning that's going all around the world, did you see any differences or cultural differences with people in one country to people in another country in the way that they learned and the way they took on information?
Shall I go first? I'm sure you go. Okay. Yeah. So at FutureLearn in particular, I really liked being into the data. It was very interesting to see, particularly across the world, for example, the time of day people, like from the time of the day that people start a course to when they finish the course, that people definitely don't like learning at night all across the world. It's a sort of fairly universal, fairly normal thing. But there was a little peak in the morning that people seemingly got quite a lot done maybe just before work at sort of 8 a.m. And that was quite a global phenomenon. So that was like one insight that I got, that just millions of people did the same thing. And then to completely polarize that, a lot of online education is still quite westernized, and westernized curriculum and westernized approaches for a Western type of culture. So actually what we saw, particularly in a social learning environment, was the use of how on FutureLearn there was comments on every single piece of educational content. So you'd watch a video, read something, and then there was comments. And you could start to identify the different cultural approaches to social learning, where a very opener to the topic would be, share your experience, or what did you think the doctor should have done to that patient, or what might you do differently, was approached so differently across sort of different, it's difficult to sort of stereotype, but different approaches, cultural approaches, and how you might interpret that question yourself, especially English as a second language, start to really open up the opportunities for thinking, well, how could we be more aware of the different cultural approaches to maybe the sensitivities or the respect that might be paid, or the sheer sort of openness of other cultures and how they would just throw themselves as like entry-level learners into quite a complex topic. And then you have to start rethinking that discussion prompt or rethinking the tools. So you know that some people might not even want to write anything. So maybe you add sort of reactions or favoriting and saving, and then start to identify themes and trends off the back of that. So yeah, like it may be not a conclusive answer, but starting to unpack that was fascinating. And I think we're really in early days on that kind of stuff, because Duolingo, they blog occasionally, but they won't let you have their data. And so, you know, there's a trade-off there as well. Any thoughts?
So I think so much of our experience is shaped by the environment that's provided, and as Matt alluded to, like the experiences are very often with colonial roots, like they all have quite similar shapes. There's loads of other pedagogies out there, but you don't see quite as many of the, you know, it needs a proactive change if we're thinking about the design to elicit a different kind of experience. So yeah, I think, you know, there's also, you know, you are shaped by your environment, like little social pockets, different, you see this maybe with different ways that work colleagues in different organizations will engage with the like functions or gifts or whatever, or maybe that's not even allowed, you know, maybe everything's just on a very, and I think that's that gives you some insights into how people learn. Some of it is shaped by the environment of their peers, some of it's shaped by the environment of their infrastructure that's provided to them. And then there are like little pockets that are perhaps needing more insight from the data to kind of get a real sense of whether or not people do things differently. But we're all human and we all have very similar kind of experiences with tech, I think.
Thanks. I'm quite interested in more complex systems, like, say, for example, designing learning for children, where children are definitely the users because they are the primary learners, but you also have other layers of users. You have the parents, you have the school, and then you have the whole education department who's trying to, want to do it a particular way. So how do you deal with that level of complexity? How do you incorporate feedback from these multiple users, such?
So the first thing is that with all things, you can only really design for a primary audience. The reality is, if you try and design for everyone, you'll design something that's fit for no one's purpose. You have to keep things, so other people will find a particular resource useful, will find a particular experience or a particular app or something useful, but having a really clear focus on who the primary audience is key. If you're thinking about things in a school context, you'd probably have other layers that are almost like little parallel kind of points for input, because it would probably go up and down. The school space is a complex feat, for sure, but it also has a lot more structure externally around it because of exams and requirement for fulfillment of particular attributes from government level. So I would say generally you have to design for one and others will find it useful, but in school context, because it is compulsory education, it has many other pressures from it, but that also provides a bit more scaffold for the thing that you would need to be providing.
Yeah, I'd add that. It's a great question. A real reflection was when I went as a student back in an earlier part of this, 2004, and I took learning circuits to a school because it obviously had to be grounded in user research for the time, and my primary audience was children, 8 to 10. And I took it in and we had a class and we had the teacher in the corner and we put it in front of these kids and they spent ages on the character selection screen. And I was like, okay, like first of all, like we were giving them eyes, hair, face, background colors and all this other stuff. And they thought that was the whole thing. They thought that was the game. And they were like, this class is so cool, we're learning about something, but this is my character. And so I took away a few options. Like I let them go back and I took away back. It was like, no, you've chosen your character. You have to learn to refresh the browser, which most of them didn't know how to do that. So that in its own right was really powerful for me because they weren't even in the learning. And then the teacher said, I think I'd actually sometimes want to do a class activity. So originally it was, what's your name, what's your character? And in the end I put a secret button in and made it bigger, which was just whiteboard activity. So the teacher could just get the whole thing on the screen and just have the whole class working together rather than independently. So my persona grew from a few children to the persona of the teacher. And then through the years, I actually got parental feedback, which said, embarrassingly, I've never understood the basics of this myself, and I've done it with my kid as their homework, and I've learned things as well. So then it's another persona, and that's just evolution. But that, for me, is just like, I mean, first of all, it makes me really excited to hear from a parent. But that's an evolution of your persona, where if you have something that's online for maybe decades, it will just naturally grow a bit. And if you're capturing the feedback, you can learn yourselves as the sort of designer or the interaction creator and think, great, that's another audience I haven't catered for. What could I do to iterate on my product?
And I think iteration is that's the key.
Yeah,
you start with one thing, you can iterate out. But if you try and design something with everybody's kind of input at the very beginning, then you end up kind of just making this kind of little monster. It has to kind of like evolve naturally to some degree at a point that you're ready to bring in the next layer of feedback as well.
So you've mentioned about the architecture of the education. And also, like, when we look at a YouTube video, a simple one, we see that the architecture is static, just static. So for a longer period of time, it won't change. You've also mentioned about the personalization of learning, yeah? And every person is different. So for that YouTube video, someone could get the maximum, but another person would not be that lucky. So being a tech person myself, is there any tendency, because that the data is gathered for each person and the platforms adapt themselves related to that person's learning behavior? Is there a tendency? And secondly, being an EdTech person, what are the pros and cons of that approach? I mean, is there any examples that's going in that direction? Because if I look at Coursera, I just see single, simple videos. They are just static there. Thank you.
So just quickly on the YouTube thing, YouTube does kind of do a bit of personalization. You know, like all the videos that you see on the, I guess, right-hand side are based on your previous learning so far. So if you're watching the same thing, if we watched the same video, we would have a completely different list of kind of suggested next steps. That's just in a basic sense. Yes, the kind of interface overall is static and wouldn't change, but there is an element of personalization that comes within it.
So I've got the weight of my friends telling me about the Diamond Age, if anyone's read that book from Neil Stephenson, and the girl's primer, which is this basically a personalized tutor that sits there and asks the little girl questions while she's reading a book, and it asks her really difficult and increasingly difficult questions. And in terms of the technology, we are at an AI revolution. I think it's going to be indisputable. If there's a 6-month pause, it's just going to be in 6 months' time, and it will probably be happening behind the scenes. And that will give us something that looks towards a scalable and, dare I say, non-STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, has had adaptive learning. So the architecture, the pedagogy, the technology, it's able to teach you, like Duolingo, it's able to teach you a language or mathematics or a science because it's a very structured discipline. Like you can take the whole thing, you can smash it into bits and say, if you know that, you can then know that, and you can build pathways somewhat from the beginning and then apply learners into the pathway, and you can have algorithms that take you down the routes. The problem is if you do that in art, or if you do that in literature, or if you do that in anything creative, it can get very confusing very quickly. Like, how could you say bad creative work? You need to learn something. However, with generative AI, it's unknown what dimensions we're going to go in with that. And so I think the answer to your question is there are loads of things you could do with architecture and personalization, particularly in very highly structured topics. And there's lots of advancements. In fact, I neglected to mention a company, that's Donald Clark's company, who you quoted, who are called, they're based in Edinburgh. Wildfire Learning is based, and it's a little mysterious company based in Edinburgh. Any woos for them? Told you they were mysterious. They're more mysterious than Rockstar Games. You don't often, Rockstar Games?
Oh, we all know what.
Yeah, but are there anyone who works for Rockstar here tonight? They're very mysterious as well. There's some mysterious big tech in Edinburgh. And anyway, the point I'm getting to is that they've done a lot about adaptive learning and adaptive learning pathways and how to engineer that. And it's a lot of black box stuff, a bit like AI. So it's super complicated because the old school method is you and I will go and spend an hour and I'll be a personal tutor and I'll just adapt myself towards you and you'll get the very best learning experience. Like it really is touted, like it's called the 2 sigma problem. The best teaching and learning you can ever have is one-to-one tuition with an expert and a learner. And that model is unscalable, untenable, and basically very expensive and only for the privileged. So therefore, you take that tutor and you do the very best you can to get as close as you can to that thing through, and I'm going to say through, a mixture of in-person, through technology, fully online, sort of the blend of technology and face-to-face. And I know it's a great question because the answer obviously is really complicated, but I think that we're getting so much faster towards a better answer as a sort of human species, dare I say. So yeah, like let's wait either 2 months or 10 years and see if the answer changes.
In reference to your presentation, Matt, about the serious experiments, how hard was it to maintain it for all these years? And what advice would you give yourself, your past self, or future person who wants to do something similar?
It's a really good question, because like most of my projects, and some of them that I didn't even put on there, totally failed like pre-launch, right? So like it's really easy to have an idea, start scribbling away, and you throw it away. I'd say that's a pre-launch, if I'm allowed to give a piece of paper such a claim. But maintaining something over the years is really tricky, because I would still say, and I would love to hear your responses, we don't have great sort of multimedia, like proper multimedia creation tools that are available to the masses that also make beautiful and accessible online learning experiences. Like HTML5 seems to be this mysterious technology to me that could make the most fantastic websites, and yet a lot of websites effectively look to me like they could have been made in Excel, because it's lots of table-based layouts with clunky scrolling, and that's about it. And it's a bit critical, because there are some websites that don't do this. But Flash allowed you to make anything in any shape and format, and it meant monsters were everywhere. Like everyone's seen a horrible Adobe Flash website, I'm sure. However, if you got it right, you could build some amazing interactions, and then behind it you could have some level of sort of server-side intelligence. But it died because of apps. And I sort of think, it's not a grudge, I just think we sort of lost some richness to multimedia authoring when Apple made the App Store and said, we're going to kill Flash as a result, because that would demolish our App Store and our revenue. And it sort of trickled down into a bit of a weird hole. And I would love to give a better answer, because I've had to just learn, like I learned no code because I couldn't find a better solution. Because I did rebuild my site in something called Articulate. It's made by Articulate. So what was it? Articulate Storyline. Yeah, I built it in something called Storyline, which is this sort of full-screen learning application. It's basically PowerPoint on learning drugs. And it's crap. It's so crap that I happily stopped paying for it and threw it away, because it makes you build little buttons that go click next, and it turns your stuff into fire extinguisher training. And it got so, because it's PowerPoint. PowerPoint's crap as well. And it got really boring really quickly, and I was trying to be a designer and creative in this boring tool. And it has no server-side intelligence, so I also threw it away for that. So do you know the answer to your question? Because I would like to know if anyone else knows of a tool or a technology that... Yeah, I think the authoring tools could be so much better for this problem. So like JavaScript, green salt, did you say? So it's like an open Flash alternative, I suppose. Or similar? Yeah. Is it easy to use?
I would say so.
Yeah.
It's a JavaScript library. But
yeah.
I think it depends how complex you want these things to be. If you want something that's kind of small and low level, you're probably going to be okay to use the free tools that are out there that get you so far, and then there will be a point that you're going to have to rebuild it. I think the reality is it's unlikely in this space, because things are moving so quickly, that if you create something today, it's going to work in 5 years' time. It's probably going to have it in, especially if it's successful and lots of people engage with it, then you're going to need to find somewhere else to put it, because it's very likely that the thing that you built it in or the place that you've housed it isn't going to be completely scalable.
Yeah. Although I was actually really surprised of how good Bubble is, and they don't get paid to say that. It's just expensive to run. That's the new problem. Is the better the tool, the more you now have to pay per month. I used to pay £10 a year for a Flash website to have it hosted. It was great. It used like megabytes of data. It was nothing. And Bubble is about $600. So it's fine. It's just annoying, because I have to pay for that.
Yep. Thank you very much. That's
Nice one. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt and Amy. That was really interesting. And we're going to take some of those ideas, and we're gonna have some breakout groups after. We'll have a 10-minute break maybe, and then we'll move into breakouts. So Matt mentioned earlier, right at the start there, about kind of thinking about a memorable learning experience that each of you have had, and that'll kind of form the basis for our discussions. We've got 10 tables set around here. They've got numbers on them. So if after sort of 10 minutes you can gravitate towards one of those tables, we're probably going to have about 6 people at each table, something like that. We've got some post-it notes there. I'll put some post-it notes on the tables as well. If you can write down your memorable experience on the post-it note, and there's you'll see something on each of the tables that basically indicates how positive or negative that experience was. So take a post-it note, We've got Sharpies there. Write down your memorable experience. Gravitate towards one of the tables. Just before we move off, just a couple of other things. One is we've kindly been given some free tickets by Design It, Build It conference that's happening next month. We've got 2 free tickets to give away. So it's going to be a draw tonight. Dates 11th and 12th of May next month. Eurovision, apparently. During the Eurovision, yeah, so sorry about that if that's your bag. We've got a fine hat over there, a children's pirate hat. We've got some paper slips next to that children's pirate hat. It's just on here. If you'd like to be in the draw, put your name on one of those slips, fold it up, pop it in the pirate hat, and we'll draw at the end of the night. And the last thing is, if you don't want to be photographed, please let us know, because there will be a photographer, or maybe a photographer, taking some pictures of the breakout activity. Thank you very much.